Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey guys, it's Debbie Potts, and I am in my new temporary office in our new house, North San Diego, and I'm in our bedroom in our on a shelf here, so hopefully the sound's not too bad, but I'm excited to finally podcast again. I've taken the last couple months pretty much off, just a few recordings, but we were staying in an Airbnb for 2 months, and the sound wasn't great there. And now just got my office furniture yesterday, and now I need to set it all up. But right now, I'm really excited to bring you one of my mentors from my FDN practitioner program, someone who does our medical director consults. Her name is Whitney Morgan. And Whitney's the founder of Morgan Nutrition and the creator of the Gluten Gauntlet System. It's a gluten-free, well, she's a gluten-free warrior and a fierce functional health coach. She's really fun to work with, and I love talking to her and learning from her. So I wanted her to come on the podcast to talk about food sensitivity testing, gut health, gluten sensitivities, and more. But Whitney also helps women repair the damage that they have done to their body from having gluten exposure, and has done this, what's happened to her own health over the past decade. She's been working with gluten sensitive and celiac clients. She's firsthand reversed and even healed her gluten related disorders for herself and many other clients, and really requires much more than just going gluten free. So to heal and rebuild your gut health and to be healthy, all around healthy, we need to test and not guess, but also work on nutrition and lifestyle habits. So we'll talk about that today. Whitney likes to say going gluten-free is like putting out the fire when your house is burning down. It's obviously the first step, but you're left with a whole lot of damage when the smoke clears. In addition, Whitney has a role of, the guru, all things gluten. She spends most of her time, professional time, advising other health coaches, as myself, and functional medicine practitioners how to deal with complex client cases. Whitney's not so secret obsession are puppies, politics, and true crime. So let's bring on Whitney and dive in a little deeper about gluten and food sensitivities, gut health, and just feeling your best. Hold on. Hey everyone, I'm so excited to have one of my favorite mentors on my show today, Whitney Morgan, to talk about all things gluten, gut health, immune system, and everything we can to really teach people how to get healthy. So Whitney, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Debbie. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm glad we can make this work. And first, I always like to talk to people about what's your why, especially as health practitioners. Everyone has their own personal story, and they became a practitioner because they followed their passion and purpose to, educate people because for a reason personally that you went through. So talk about your background and your journey towards this.
Sure. Well, I never expected to be in the alternative health field. I was a fundraiser for the nonprofit world, and then I was in corporate America for a while. But my own personal health journey is what led me here, like so many of us, right? I think it really began in my 20s when I got struck with chronic panic attacks. But then when I had my daughter in my 30s, I developed psoriasis. A few years after that, interstitial cystitis. And then after that, Hashimoto's. And it wasn't until 2010 that really by a fluke, we weren't looking for it. We discovered that I had celiac disease. So I am one of those silent celiacs. I never had GI issues, no cramping, no bloating, nothing like that. All of my symptomology well, my primary symptomology was neurological. It was the panic, right? And then I started developing autoimmune diseases. So I'd collected 3 of them before I found out about the original autoimmune disease, right? My celiac disease. So that's really what just kind of catapulted me down this rabbit hole of alternative healing. And I have to say that my diagnosis of interstitial cystitis was probably the biggest motivator, because it's just chronic, intense pain 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the specialist that diagnosed me basically said, there's nothing that can be done, right? It's not going to kill you, but you'll die with it, and it's going to get worse. Join a support group. So I just, at that moment, said, no, I need to walk away from this traditional paradigm. I'm not going to accept that story. And that's when I started devoting my time to self-study of herbs and diets, therapeutic diets, naturopathy, and then I started acupuncture school. And I actually got my celiac diagnosis when I was in acupuncture school. So I was already kind of rooted in an alternative mindset by the time I got my celiac diagnosis. And then I just started putting all the pieces of the puzzle together and reverse engineering, right, my evolution of this health history, and it all made sense. So I'm super passionate about autoimmune diseases in general. And the primary trigger for a lot of autoimmune disease out there is gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. And most of that goes undetected for so many years, and maybe even forever. So I'm really just kind of on this passion to educate people about, hey, there's so many ways in which gluten sensitivity can impact your health. And, if you have this diagnosis or these symptoms, you might want to get tested. Right. And then we can start the work of healing the damage that gluten has done to their body for God knows how many years.
Yeah.
So
And
that's my story.
for 20 years with that, you said.
Yeah. It was 20 years before I got my diagnosis. Yeah.
Wow. I know.
That's not uncommon with gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. It's not uncommon at all.
So what are some common symptoms that people, a lot of our listeners are endurance athletes, and, I'm trying to focus on teaching them how to get healthy, be fit and healthy on the inside and out. And I think a lot of athletes just exercise to get healthy, and they don't take care of the other part of really optimizing their health from the inside out. Right. So they might be ignoring, I think a lot of people, athlete or not, ignore these symptoms that I want you to share, because I think they think they're the normal, that's just how I am.
Sure. Well, obviously there are the traditional recognized symptoms of GI distress, right? Anytime there's gas, bloating, indigestion, chronic constipation, chronic diarrhea, anything like that, IBS, SIBO, those kinds of health issues, that's a big red flag for gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. But beyond that, like I said, panic attacks, anxiety, depression, learning disabilities, ADD, ADHD, sensory disorders, any sort of mood disorder, even schizophrenia. So in terms of neurological stuff, it really it runs the gamut of the possible symptoms. And then skin issues are a big red flag. So eczema, psoriasis, unexplained like atopic dermatitis. Some people get those little bumps on the back of the arms. We call them chicken skin. That's also another sign. So a lot of skin issues. And then you've got like joint pain, muscle wasting, or the inability to grow muscle or maintain muscle mass can be a sign. So can stubborn weight gain. How many times have you worked with clients who they think they're doing everything right, and they've got their diet on track, and they're exercising like crazy, and the weight's not falling off?
Yeah,
right.
Most people.
Sometimes, yeah, exactly. Sometimes that is it's because of an immune response to gluten, or it's because of exposure to the lectin in gluten. So it does so much systemic damage. And then even beyond that, things like any autoimmune disease, right? So anytime someone has Hashimoto's or or scleroderma or rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, any autoimmune diagnosis should be a red flag for an underlying gluten issue. And then neurological things that happen in the periphery, right? So pins and needles, any numbness in the extremities, and like I said, any joint pain. It's really kind of this endless laundry list of symptoms, and all of these symptoms seem to be all over the body. They don't really have a connection to one another, but they all can be connected to an underlying gluten sensitivity, right? So you can have anxiety attacks and you can have joint pain, and they can be happening for the same reason.
But I'm smiling because I think it's so challenging for people because they, go see their doctor to get help. It's like, why do I have these problems? And traditional medicine, not bashing it, but it's just, they're not trained in all this. So that, you're going to go see a doctor, and like you said, 20 years, you're trying to figure out what the heck's going on. And without really getting the right lab testing, you have no idea what these things are going on. And traditional medicine doesn't cover any of these type of labs, and even talk about nutritional therapy and food elimination protocols to help kind of figure out what is the trigger.
Right. And I'd have to say too, that in terms of traditional medicine, I was a pretty savvy, well-skilled consumer. I come from a medical background. A lot of people in my family were doctors. My father was a surgeon. My mom was an OR nurse. I mean, I was raised kind of with that, Western medicine has a solution to everything. So I didn't just go to a doctor. I went to, the specialist, right? Yeah. The cream of the crop. That's how I was trained to consume healthcare. You go to a specialist. You don't go to a GP. I mean, my family was kind of a snob in that way, doctor snobs. And so I got the best healthcare, quote unquote, right, that was available, and from the most skilled specialists. But they all looked at me from their particular, set of glasses, right? It's like the urologist was looking through his, urology lens, and the dermatologist was looking through her dermatology lens. They aren't trained in the connections to the gut or to the immune system or to how the bladder could be connected to the skin. Right? I mean, they're just not trained that way. So it's not, like you said, it's not like I'm bashing Western medicine. It's just they did not have the skill set to see what was going on with me. And I think that's kind of the downfall of our medical paradigm, is it really is good at diagnosis and acute disease, but it's really not great at chronic disease management.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they don't really search alternative methods and getting to think outside of the box and go, okay, why is this happening? What's the root cause? What are the triggers?
Right.
Because it's never just necessarily one thing. But it seems like people don't search for people like us until they've reached the rock bottom. Like, you said 20 years. I've spent 8 years, trying to get results, and until I could find functional medicine, FDN practitioners, nutritional therapy, that you can really get your hands on the right lab testing and invest in your health. And I was just, trying to write about that every day this week in my blogs, because it just seems like the state of our world, not just our country, our whole world, that we should be doing this. And if we can connect this gluten sensitivity to our immune system, and what we should all be striving to improve our vitality and strengthen our immune system and build resiliency, this is kind of what we need to do, is investigate a little deeper and find out what's going on underneath, not just go, oh, I'm getting older. This is how it is. That's how my body works.
Exactly. Accepting it as normal. And I think what's so important for people to understand is that, in the functional health or functional medicine world, we are focused on root causes, but not a singular root cause. It's not like I think gluten is the reason for everything. I don't. But the way I think about it, it comes from a Chinese medicine philosophy, which is called the root branch philosophy. And so health is, the health of a tree you can see it in the vitality of the leaves and the branches, right? The beauty that is the tree, right? I mean, we can see we know a healthy tree when we see it. But if something is going wrong with the tree, the symptoms show up in the branches and the leaves. But the arborist or the gardener, they draw their attention to the soil. I mean, they might prune here and there, and they might do a little, adjustments in the tree itself, but they really go to the soil because they know that that's kind of the source of not only the problem, but it's also where you find the solution, right? And it's never just one thing.
Yeah.
It could be gut infections like an overgrowth of Klebsiella in addition to an undetected gluten sensitivity. Oh, and hey, you also are holding on to inorganic mercury from those fillings in your mouth. And all those things together are your unique perfect storm that results in all of this stuff showing up in the branches, right?
Yeah. That's funny because I'm always drawn to the tree of life.
Yes.
That explains a little bit a different approach to what is a tree of life. Traditional Chinese medicine, I always love hearing the philosophy because it makes me think, oh, that makes so much more sense if you look at that perspective and combine, the two together. But let's kind of talk about what we were chatting about online is what's so bad about wheat and gluten and why does there seem to be more gluten sensitivity these days than in the past?
Yeah, well, the research is still out on why, but certainly we can draw some correlations based on data that we have in terms of disease explosion, right? The explosion of rates of certain disease processes, which in 1996 kind of really took off. You saw a lot more autoimmune disease, a lot more diabetes. Everything skyrocketed in the chronic disease world, right? Around 1996, that's when it started going up. And coincidentally, that's when GMOs really hit our food supply. Now, I'm not saying GMOs or glyphosate are the causal factors of all of that, but it's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? I think we had an environment and a food environment and an environmental toxin environment that already predisposed us to eventually wind up with chronic disease down the road. And then we all got hit with this huge influx of this new thing. And lo and behold, glyphosate, like gluten, punches holes in the gut. So every time you're exposed to glyphosate from eating corn on the cob, your gut gets leaky. And you and I know, right? That is really the origin point of so many disease processes is the mucosal barrier integrity. And if that isn't stable and if it's getting leaky or permeable on a daily basis because it's getting damaged, then you're just accelerating the potential of random disease processes, whether it's, your weak link might be your brain. And so your immune system might start making antibodies to your myelin sheath and you wind up with multiple sclerosis 15 years down the road, right? My weak link was my skin. That's where it showed up first after the anxiety, but the skin was the first autoimmune disease I got, right? So that also depends on what your picture looks like as opposed to my picture. Depends on what our personal weak links are. But I think we can all see that since 1996, this has exploded. And that's kind of my that's my explanation. I think it's valid. And I think a lot of people are tending towards that argument. But that's all well and good. But then you have to say, well, what do we do about that? Right? We can't turn back the clock. So what we need to do about it is heal the damage that is done and recognize that we have to do our best to eliminate our exposure, not only to the glyphosate, but to all the other things that predisposed us to being vulnerable to that in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So it's not just gluten, like everyone just get gluten-free food and avoid gluten and you're going to be perfect.
Absolutely not. And absolutely not. In fact, that's rarely the case. And to add insult to injury, glyphosate is used to flash dry wheat crops. So even if it's not used during the growing process, it's used during the harvesting process. So all the wheat that you're consuming in the US has glyphosate on it. And what studies have shown is that when we consume wheat and glyphosate together, that's like supersizing a leaky gut. It's just the most horrible thing we can do for our gut integrity. But wheat also has changed quite a bit, over the last several decades, and to become more intense. The gluten aspects of wheat make up more of the wheat protein, right, than it did in ancient grains or earlier grains. But gluten is still gluten. Wheat germ agglutinin, the lectin, is still the same, structurally speaking, to the immune system, and they've always been very detrimental. Particularly wheat germ agglutinin. I mean, if you're an athlete, or if you're just someone who exercises because, hey, you want to lose weight and you want to be healthier, the worst thing you can do is consume anything with wheat germ agglutinin in it, because it will disrupt your performance, your muscle mass, your endocrine signaling, everything.
By your gut health, because you're putting holes in your gut, or is it?
Well, so there's several mechanisms that happen. Certainly, and this is wheat germ agglutinin. This is the lectin part of wheat. So we call it WGA for short. So yes, it is very destructive to the gut lining, and it pokes holes in the gut, right? So, it gives everyone a leaky gut. Doesn't matter if you're sensitive to gluten or not. Eating it will give you a leaky gut. But then WGA also infiltrates through the gut lining into the bloodstream, and it's a very sticky little protein, and it really has an affinity for particular organs and tissues, and it will travel and stick to them. And then it will provoke your immune system to start destroying the tissue around it. So, for instance, thyroid tissue is a big attractive nuisance for WGA, right? It goes to the thyroid, it goes to the joints, it goes to the brain. Those are kind of like the three big places where it winds up. And when it does that, the immune system, because WGA doesn't belong outside of the gut, right? The immune system goes after it. And so in that battle, the immune system starts destroying your thyroid tissue, your joint cartilage, various neurological tissues, right? And then you get autoimmune disease. Yeah.
And people don't even know they have it.
Correct.
I mean, that's going on.
It happens silently for years. But also WGA is an insulin mimicker. So it will dock into the insulin cell receptors and kind of jam the signal. And instead of your body saying, hey, let's burn fat for energy, no, WGA will tell your body to store fat. It will actually drive sugar into the fat cells and perpetuate fat storage, right? So all of that fat that you're trying to get off on the treadmill, forget it. It's not going anywhere, right? It also keeps sugar from getting into your muscles. So you get some of this muscle wasting or the inability to build muscle. And then, of course, it also goes into the brain and promotes neurodegenerative diseases.
Yeah, and I think, people don't realize, well, a lot of people think gluten-free stuff is a trend, and it's just some hot thing, so they ignore it, but they maybe do it sometimes, but not 100% of the time. And years ago, I don't know, Sean Croxton or someone said gluten-free, or when you need to, it's like being pregnant or not pregnant or not pregnant, that you avoid gluten just like 50% of the time and think you're still fine.
Right. And I hear that too from clients when I ask about their diet. They'll say, oh, well, I'm mostly gluten-free. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. So the problem with gluten is it's super inflammatory. And now I use the word gluten because that's kind of the way, that's in our vernacular. That's what we're used to saying. But what I really mean is wheat, right? Wheat is very, very inflammatory. The gluten parts of wheat, the non-gluten parts of wheat, they're all inflammatory. And that inflammatory cascade can go on for months. So if I have a little bit of gluten, on Monday and then a little bit of gluten on, the next Monday, that doesn't really matter. It's not like the week in between I'm fine. No, that inflammation is still going on. So all it takes is one exposure every few months to be in a constant state of inflammation, particularly if you're sensitive to it. And I think the problem here is that, the research suggests that over a third of people in the United States are gluten or wheat sensitive to some degree. But most go undiagnosed because the testing is wrong or just poor, right? Or their symptoms aren't correlated with that, and so they never get tested in the first place because traditional medicine doesn't recognize anything outside of the GI tract as a symptom of gluten sensitivity.
That's kind of sad because there's not many symptoms inside, and they wouldn't even know that there is leaky gut in Western medicine, right? I mean, what are they even testing, or they don't probably associate anything with it then?
No, they really don't. So, and like I told you, we didn't find mine except as a fluke. And I could have still been doing the same thing I was doing then and collecting autoimmune diseases. I mean, I'm really grateful for my diagnosis, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people walking around out there that even have celiac disease and don't know it.
So you're saying you can get some symptom like autoimmune disease with, say, psoriasis, eczema, but then it keeps continuing, and you have this kind of domino effect into different autoimmune disease. So you're not just limited to I only get this one, that's it. I could have 5 different ones.
No, in fact, particularly women tend to be more prone to autoimmune diseases, and they tend to collect more than one. If you've been diagnosed with one autoimmune disease, chances are you've got another one that's simmering somewhere, right? So any autoimmune disease, anyone with an autoimmune disease should be tested for gluten sensitivity and celiac disease, or I should say that better, wheat sensitivity and celiac disease.
So that's kind of a good segue into testing, because I totally believe that a lot of people, especially, stubborn individuals that are not going to believe that they need to avoid certain foods as wheat, gluten, unless they do testing. So here's a piece of paper. Here's what's going on inside your gut. Then we might be more motivated to make better choices and change our lifestyle around if we have this document test results of what's actually going on under the hood, instead of just guessing and just doing it 50%, 70% of the time. Right.
And if someone goes to their regular doctor and says, hey, I just listened to this podcast and I've got all these symptoms and I think I need to get tested for gluten sensitivity, that doc is probably going to run a celiac blood test, because that everything in traditional medicine around gluten is driven by the celiac population. So a celiac blood test is going to test you for an immune response to one peptide of gluten, just one. And then it'll test you for a couple of enzymes like transglutaminase 2, endomyocin, something like that. These are enzymes that the immune system reacts to specifically when there's an autoimmune process going on with the gut. And that's the thing. Celiac disease is caused by gluten, but the disease itself is an autoimmune process located in the gut. Okay? So when they're running a quote unquote gluten sensitivity test, they're actually running a celiac panel, which is looking for the autoimmune process in the gut. It's not looking for gluten sensitivity or wheat sensitivity. And there are so many more peptides to gluten, and there's so many non-gluten parts of wheat, like wheat germ agglutinin, that the immune system can be super reactive to, but that's never going to show up on a traditional celiac panel because they're not looking for that. That's not how they're trained. So I recommend Vibrant Wellness testing. Something called the Wheat Zoomer. That is the most comprehensive wheat sensitivity, gluten sensitivity, and it has a celiac panel on it. It covers all the bases. It does everything. And it's a peptide-based test. So it's tested. What that means is it's looking at all of the smallest little parts of wheat and gluten. and testing them each specifically to see how your immune system reacts to it. So it has the greatest sensitivity and the greatest specificity of any gluten test on the market, hands down. And it's the best, it's the most reasonably priced too, of all of the specialized functional labs that you and I are familiar with. The Wheat Zoomer, hands down, is the most economical.
And so if people do this test, they want to do it ideally with a practitioner to help interpret the results and figure out a plan. And because it's not just getting the test and taking out gluten and being gluten-free, right? I mean, there's other things we need to look at.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is being truly gluten-free. So a lot of people will go gluten-free and then not feel better. And part of the reason they don't feel better is they're not truly gluten-free. They're still living in a house where other people are consuming gluten. They're getting cross-contaminated. They're going out to dinner every once in a while. They're getting contaminated in a restaurant. And like we were talking about, all it takes is an occasional exposure, and whatever disease processes or inflammatory processes you've got going on are going to continue. So what happens in my practice is I'll have someone who comes to me and says, I've been gluten-free for 5 years, and I'm so careful, I'm so diligent, and they're in theory doing everything right. And then we test them and we see that they're still being exposed. 9 times out of 10, it's because the people in their house are still eating gluten. It's still coming into the kitchen, right? Or it's still in their makeup. They're still using the same makeup, and they're putting, wheat-based products on their face every day. So there's a lot of different ways you can get exposed, but usually it's a home exposure on a consistent basis. So that's when we have to kind of dive down and get the entire home completely gluten-free. Then you have a chance to truly be gluten-free. But the other reason why some people aren't gluten-free, or they don't feel better on a gluten-free diet, is because there are other non-gluten foods that cross-react with gluten that the immune system can mistake for gluten. So I can be successful at eliminating gluten from my life, but if my immune system thinks corn is the same as gluten, and I'm still eating corn on my gluten-free diet, then I'm still going to have my Hashimoto's. I'm still going to have my psoriasis. I'm still going to have the inflammation because my immune system mistakes them for the same thing.
And then what else cross reacts with gluten is
dairy, cow dairy, rice, corn, millet, baker's yeast and brewer's yeast, and to a certain extent, oats.
So pretty much eliminate all that stuff. That the cow dairy, because I think it's hard not to do any dairy at all. But you have to test and see how you feel. But I find like goat or sheep cheese I can do, but cow dairy try to avoid. The raw dairy, the pasteurized dairy, especially.
Absolutely.
But, I think it's a struggle for people. Again, they don't know, and it's hard to be disciplined if you don't have, as I said before, the evidence, doing your own lab testing, really investigate a little bit deeper what's going on. Because to be disciplined, I think, to take out all these corn and, all these things we're talking about, it's like, okay, how are you going to do it? Stick with it and be motivated to stay with that as your the new lifestyle and eating habits.
Right.
So the testing you were talking about earlier about doing, the whole household. I find a lot of times when I work with clients, really to make it sustainable the way they're eating and their food they choose to eat, that the whole household, the family should be eating this way and not feel like it's a diet. And I think that's a big change, and making it a new positive mindset when you remove these foods and start paying attention how you feel afterwards and how much more energy you have and satisfied, you're not bloated and gas and all these side effects. I think, what are some strategies you find working with clients to help them do this as a family and be motivated to stick with it as a new lifestyle eating habit long term?
Yeah, well, it's one of the hardest things that people struggle with is getting their entire family on board with this kind of a dietary shift. But one motivating thing, particularly if parents, particularly if there's children involved, is that gluten sensitivity tends to run in families. So I usually work with women, and if the mom is gluten sensitive, most likely the kids are too. It might not be showing up in the same way, but it will show up eventually. So, and a lot of really nasty things can happen when kids are gluten sensitive and they continue to consume it, like type 1 diabetes, right? Learning disabilities, all, sensory disorders, all kinds of things. So that can be a very motivating factor for parents. But I actually developed a mini course that covers this entirely. It basically just teaches people how to establish a gluten-free house. And the first lesson in my course is all about getting people on board. How do you go about having those conversations? How do you go about making compromises and still keeping yourself safe? What are the strategies? And because that is the biggest challenge for most people, is getting that support initially. Once you get family members on board, the rest is really easy, because there's really nothing you can't have. I mean, there's nothing you can't recreate, right? Yeah. Comfort food wise, it's actually pretty easy to live a gluten-free life. It mostly is a mindset issue. There's this idea that there's going to be deprivation, but that's really not the case. So I recommend if any of your listeners are interested, they can take a look at my course. And I know we're going to talk about that because that's part of the gift that I have for your, crew.
Why don't you just share that now while we're on it? So we'll put all the links in the show notes. We'll talk about what your program is and the gift we're giving to everyone. Yeah, well, my course, it's an online course. It's got 5 lessons. The cool thing, though, is that during each lesson, enrollees have the chance to talk to me. They can ask me questions. So we have like this instant message thing in a private portal. So they do get some access, and I can help them troubleshoot. But it goes through, getting everyone on board, and then cleaning out your pantry, ways to shop, making sure you're eliminating all the hiding places in your kitchen, and then all the places the gluten hides outside of your kitchen, right? Your medicine cabinet, right? Your makeup bag, right? And even some weird places like orthodontia devices. I mean, there's all kinds of weird places where gluten can hide. So that's what my course covers, and it takes people through in 5 weeks, just this like zone by zone, right? Each week covers a different zone, and they'll have homework to do, tasks to complete, and then have the opportunity to ask me questions and get some help from me. The course is designed to take 5 weeks, but you can binge it. You can go through it as much as you want. There's a lot of resources that you can print and kind of have, to come back to. And it costs $127. It's super reasonable. And for your crew, I'm going to offer a promotional code that gives them $50 off. Yep. And what's even better is if they go to the link, they can actually get the first lesson for free. So they can just kind of dabble their toes in the water, check it out, see if they like it. And then if they want to upgrade to the rest of the course, they can still use that promotion code. Awesome. So make sure you guys go below the podcast and click on the links in the show notes so we can take advantage of it. Especially, I think everyone this year, 2020, has been probably not eating as ideal as they should be, and really working on their nutrition and lifestyle habits to be healthy. Mm-hmm. And I think gluten is you look at what people are buying at the stores and what people are eating, and they're like, I fell off the wagon. I'm not taking care of myself as well. I just at home all day working, and they're eating more. So I think it's a great opportunity right now to start taking care of yourself. And as I keep saying, taking ownership of your health and being responsible, because I just always think it's funny how many people think, I can't spend that money on myself, but then they'll go drop how much money on, their car or a new bike, or, athletes spending money on their equipment. But you say, okay, I want to spend this much money on a lab test and coaching. They're like, oh, that's too much for me. I'm like, okay, what's more important, your health or, your bicycle or your car? So right. Well, I think pay now or pay later, right? So invest in your health now, or you may pay for it in diagnosis later. Yeah. That is really much more complicated to deal with. And so talk about, in our last little bit here, I want to dive into a little bit more on the Vibrant Wellness. We talked about the wheat zoomer, but there's other Zoomers and a food sensitivity test. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know we in FDN as practitioners, we choose from different labs, and this is always a good one. And you use this with your clients. So it's not just finding these hidden internal stressors that are sources of chronic stress, but just not just looking at the wheat gluten, but the cross-reactive ones as well.
Yeah, I'll run, they have a dairy Zoomer and a corn Zoomer and a grain Zoomer. And so I will run all those 3 labs plus a wheat Zoomer on every client. So I'm looking at the cross-reactive potentials in addition to their wheat and gluten sensitivity levels. And the nice thing about these tests is that just like the wheat Zoomer, they're all at the level of the peptide. And what that really means is that they take this whole food and they break it down into all of the peptides, and that's what they're testing your immune response to. Because the thing is that when we're looking, most food sensitivity panels out there are testing for your reaction to the whole food, right? Just corn in general, the whole protein. But in theory, that should never come into contact with your immune system. If you have a reaction to the whole protein of corn, that tells us more about your digestion and your leaky gut than anything else. It tells us you're not breaking down your food and that these undigested proteins are getting through your gut because your gut's leaky, and then your immune system is getting aggravated and making antibodies. But what really, where the gold of the information really is looking at how your immune system is responding to these peptides. Because what I see in my practice is that you can take just a general food sensitivity panel and come up negative to rice, to corn, to dairy, but then you take the Zoomers and it lights up like a Christmas tree, because you can be negative to the whole food, but you can be positive to the peptides of those food. And that's what we really want to know, because that's what starts all of this inflammatory process and progression towards autoimmunity and cognitive diseases and all of that, right? So that's where we focus is looking at the peptide sensitivity.
And that's probably the most important area to start, because even if I do a gut test and find all these different pathogens and bacteria imbalances, and then I start doing a gut restoration program, well, if I keep eating those foods that keep destroying my gut by putting holes in them, right, I'm taking 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and really never making progress.
Absolutely. I mean, I talk to clients about this all the time. It's like, how many times have you talked to clients about their personal story and you've seen the long list of supplements that they've tried, right? The hundreds and hundreds of dollars they've spent on a variety of different supplements over the years. Well, if they're continuing to eat things that are inflaming their gut, breaking down the gut lining, aggravating the immune system, it doesn't matter what supplements you're taking. That's just, you're just flushing money down the toilet. Mm-hmm. You need the data. The most important thing about healing is eliminating the triggers. That's the most important step. That's the step that most people skip. They go to Google and they say, migraines, and they get a list of herbs or supplements for migraines. I'm not saying that won't help, but why do you have the migraines in the first place, right? And by the way, migraines is also a very common symptom of gluten sensitivity. So, so the trigger, don't you want to get to the trigger and get rid of it? I can't remember who it is that uses this analogy. It might be Chris Kresser, but he says, if you've got a big rock in your shoe and you're walking around and, right, it's painful, are you just going to keep popping ibuprofen all day? No, you're going to take your shoe off. You're going to take the rock out, right? That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's a great example. But I think that's why I feel like everyone just deals with it and just struggles and just lets that become their new normal and never really realizing, hey, I could be doing better. This is not living my best life and being my best self. And I just posted that the other day, like my oats test and, getting my other labs done, they're not what I think they should be. And I had no idea. We'll talk about mold in another episode, but here I'm feeling great. I have good energy. My workouts are getting better, but I'm like damaged inside. So It's like, am I
Right.
going to settle that? I could be thriving even more and enjoying life even much higher percentage. So that's
Right.
what I keep trying to say to people. You have no idea unless you invest in, lab tests and getting a good health coach to figure it out. But I think
Absolutely.
not selling health coaching, but it's like, I just feel so strongly with our world right now. We should be doing something to get healthy, and
Yes.
your immune system, start with working on your gut health. And how do you improve your
Absolutely.
gut health is getting these type of Zoomers done to really identify what your triggers are.
Yep. I think it's very important for all of us to look at not only the foods we eat, but what's the state of our microbiome, running a gut test so that we can see what bacteria and parasites and yeast and all that kind of stuff is going on, right? Are we holding on to toxins and heavy metals, or, and some of those are mycotoxins? Because even if all of that stuff, even if we feel awesome, right?
Yeah.
That's now. We feel awesome now, right? But symptoms don't show up until there's a certain level of damage and dysfunction at the level of the tissue, right? Then, once the damage progresses past a certain point, then the symptoms show up. But at the first symptom, that's not when the problem starts. The problem started years before that,
Yeah.
right? So that's why it's so important, to do these tests when you feel good. That's the perfect time.
That's what I keep trying to say, is because when I had my, breakdown of my body systems and burnout in March 2013, it didn't happen in March. It was probably, 5-10 years before that when I started running my own business and training for multiple Ironmans every year at the same time. And it wasn't because I was over exercising. It was just a combination of everything
Right.
that accumulated over time, and then your defense systems are weak, and so you're so vulnerable to everything to break yourself down.
Absolutely.
So,
And one thing that we didn't talk about is that when it comes to wheat, just eating wheat will set you up for chronic nutrient deficiencies. So vitamin D and minerals and iron. And when you're talking about athletic performance, you need all these things more than the average Joe, right? So if you are depriving your body, or if you're not absorbing these things the way that you should be, because you're continuing to consume wheat and gluten, you're going to pay for that. You're going to pay for that in more injuries because you're not going to have minerals, right? You're going to pay for that in inflammation. You're going to pay for that getting sick because you're not going to have the vitamin D, and you're going to be fatigued because you're going to be low on iron, right? So it's all this domino effect.
Yep. And you have no idea without doing the right test.
Right.
And I think a lot of people get, their tests from the doctor and don't really go deeper than that, don't really know what's actually going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just struggle. So let's put everything in the show notes. What you've got going on in January is your wheat program. Anything else going on this fall for you, and wrapping up the year?
Well, I actually just launched a new program around the thyroid. So I've got a thyroid reboot program. And that really came out of so many of my clients have Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism. So that's new. So if folks want to look at that, they can go to my website at morgannutrition.com. But other than that, I am just, I'm spreading the word. I'm going to be working on a group program, like you said, coming up in the wintertime, hopefully. So, if you follow me on Instagram or you get on my mailing list, you'll get a heads up when I have a group program available. And that's great for some people who, they really want to do the work, but they can't afford the price tag that comes along with being a private one-on-one client. So to be able to spend a little less money and work with a group and get the support of a group, that can be super beneficial for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I know. It's good to have both options, because not everyone can do the one-on-one. So Thank you so much for your wise knowledge and sharing your journey with us. And, it's great to hear about how you're creating impact and keeping up with your passion and purpose. So thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Put everything in the show notes, and we'll have you come on the show again to talk about some more topics, because you are so wise. And, it'd be fun to tie in Chinese medicine as well, traditional Chinese medicine into all this.
Sure.
I love hearing that spin of it too. So
that would be fun. We could do a woo-woo episode, right?
Yeah. It's always good. People need to learn all this, and it's a continuous process to keep learning and growing. So thank you.
All right.
Life is not a race. It is a journey for sure.
That's right. Well, thanks, Debbie. I've had a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.